Hello, everybody, and welcome to All Blaze No Glory, the podcast. Unfortunately, it's a solo effort from me tonight, as Ewan McKee, my guest, had to postpone. Ewan and I are definitely going to bring you this combat sports episode. I'm looking forward to it because Ewan's a super sort of charismatic guy who's got loads of views on combat sports and knows a lot about it. So I'm looking forward to chatting to him about that. A couple of sort of more somber things before we get into the podcast itself. First and foremost, today, the time of recording, it's the 27th of January, and it's quite a difficult day for members and former members of Forester Rugby Club, as Sean Broadfoot was laid to rest today. He passed away just before Christmas, leaving a wife and 2 children, but also was a guy who left an impression on everyone who played with him, was coached by him, or just knew him at Forester Rugby Club. He was a charismatic guy, fun, made you feel welcome, made you feel part of the gang, and it will be sorely missed. So my thoughts again, and I know I brought it up before, are with the Broadfoot family. If this gets back to you, just let you know that you guys and Sean are in my thoughts, as well as the extended Forester Rugby Club family. Moving on for that is another rather sombre matter, but perhaps with some light at the end. A former podcast guest, Michael Maudsley, and I'm sorry if I butchered your name, has advised me of the David Hill Memorial Quaich. Now, David Hill's not someone I knew, but he died suddenly playing rugby in Dublin on the 19th of March 2022 at just age 30. He had a lot of family and friends who are obviously very devastated at someone dying so young. I am going to have Michael on and David's father on the podcast around about the end of February or the start of March to talk about David, to talk about the David Hill Memorial Quaich in more detail. But what I can tell you is that there will be a fixture in his honour, which is of course the David Hill Memorial Quaich, which will take place on the 11th of March 2023 at Peffer Mill on the all-weather pitch. So the game will definitely go ahead on that day. There should be no other issues. Entry is free. There will be a bar open, and they'll be doing a collection for Cardiac Risk in Young, or I think it's CRY for short, the charity. So I'll post out a link to that in the podcast description, but I'll also put links to that on Facebook and on my Wix site, which I think you can find a link for on Twitter as well. So you guys have it. So we'll get into that more detail with Michael and David's father. But if you could maybe go and have a look and maybe give a donation to Cardiac Risk in the Young charity, then that would be much appreciated. If you can give what you can, and thank you for your consideration of that, everyone. Now, to move on to what the podcast, I guess. I wanted to talk about a couple of things tonight, which I thought would be a bit more of a bonus filler, and maybe just a bit of fun. So earlier on Twitter today, I was sitting waiting for a case to call and work, and I noticed that someone had suggested who would win out of URSC United Rugby Championship 15, and who would win out of Premiership 15, and they asked who would be in the teams. So I thought I'd have a go at this. Now, I have to concede, my knowledge of the Premiership is probably not so good. In fact, my knowledge of some URC teams is probably lacking when it comes to it as well. However, I will attempt to give a team that I think would, win. So, I'm going to start with the Premiership team because this is probably the team I make the biggest meal of, and probably get shouted at if any English rugby fans or fans of these teams are listening. But I'm going to start with a loose head prop, and I think it's pretty straightforward who it's going to be. But before we go into that, sorry, I'm just saying now, I'm not taking injuries at the moment into account. And this is as if all the players are fitting well, and I know that's never the case, but it just makes it a bit easier for me because I don't have to go and look up which player in the Premiership is injured. I mean, the only injury I'm aware of is Jamie George because it happened right in front of me in the Lothian stand. So, anyway, getting on to that because I'm now going off on a tangent again. The loose head for the Premiership 15, I think everybody would probably agree would be Ellis Genge. I'm sure there'll be some Joe Marler fans that love that, that would like to see that, see him in, and there's maybe a couple others that can put their hand up. But for me, it's got to be Ellis Genge. He's probably, it's been a bit criminal from England actually that he's not been picked and playing as much. He's better than Mako as far as I'm concerned, and therefore he gets the nod for me. In hooker, I mean, Jamie George would have been an obvious candidate. He is an England hooker. He's a fantastic player. But for me, for England, it's got to be Luke Cowan-Dickie. I've always been a Luke Cowan-Dickie fan. Maybe not a fan of his sort of leanings in relation to vaccines and stuff, but I'm more of a fan of him in terms of a rugby player, and he is a good quality rugby player. Yeah, he would get the nod for me. So it's kind of turning into an England front row, of course, with Kyle Sinclair making up the tight head position, and that gives us three strong scrummagers, I would say, but also quite good in the loose, tidy operators. Then looking at the second row, now I'm surprised England don't do this very often, but I would have Maro Itoje with Courtney Lawes. This Johnny Hill thing I don't get. I'm sure there's other players and people jumping up and down that I don't know about that should be in there, but for me, it's got to be Maro Itoje with Courtney Lawes. Now, basically at the moment, I guess it sounds like I'm just picking the England team, and to an extent, I guess I am. But I think it's fair to say that those two are two of the best in the Premiership, and they're two of England's best. Now at 6, I'm going Tom Curry. I think Tom Curry's just fantastic, and I was a bit disappointed because Mish was outplaying him in the Lions tour in the lead up to the game, but he is a phenomenal player. He's quite young. He makes the team up, I think. And then at 7, I've went with Ben Earls, who I think is a criminally underrated player for England, and another player that I think will do a really good job in that role, especially against the kind of back row that the URC can produce. And then at 8 jersey, I've went Dombrandt, and I think the reason I've went Dombrandt is just because he's a better all-round rugby player, in my opinion, than Billy Vunipola. And also, having watched Billy against with Saracens against Edinburgh, what a whiny moaner he is. No one wants to see that in a friendly game between the URC and the in the Premiership. At 9, well, this is where it becomes kind of my team. Unfortunately, he's now left. I would have had Faf de Klerk in a second in the squad, but for me, I'm going to go Danny Kerr because he's character and he's exciting and attacking rugby player. And just to make it a bit more Harlequinsy, I'm also going to add in Marcus Smith at 10. I think I want excitement and enjoyability. I suppose you could argue that linchpin it would be Owen Farrell, but for me, I think Marcus Smith makes it a much more exciting team to watch. Would I have Owen Farrell at 12? That's a tough question. I'm probably going to say no. Probably not going to have Owen Farrell at 12. I think I would have Mano Tuolangi at 12. And when you hear the next selection, you might know why. And I know you're probably all thinking it's Scottish bias, you're going to say Chris Harris, and I'm not going to say Chris Harris actually, but I think Mano Tuilagi, he makes those yards. He's got a bit of an offloading game about him as well. He's maybe not the distributor or the kicker that Farrell is, but he's got that ability to play ball and to do exciting things in attack. And at the end of the day, if it's going to be some kind of all-star team, that's what you want. At 13, I'm going to say Jonathan Joseph. I know he may have served his time to some people a little bit. He's not really getting in the England squad anymore, but he's an exciting runner, and that's what I want to see in that team. Chris Harris was probably close for me at 13, or you move Tuilagi outside. Wingers, I would probably go for Henry A. Rundle. Exciting prospect, exciting runner with the ball. The other one's also an exciting runner from the ball in the wing. And finally, a Welsh person in Lewis Rees-Zammit, who is absolutely jets and is just a brilliant, brilliant player. And lastly, this is where it gets tricky for me, because you could pick an England fullback or whatever, but I want to see someone a little bit more cavalier, someone a bit more mad. And I'm gonna exert my Scottish bias here. I'd like to see Stuart Hogg come in and take that role for himself. I just think it would be exciting to see a Rundle with a player that's a bit more of a ball player. Like Hogg is a distributor of the ball more than a lot of fullbacks. So I'd like to see Hogg come in with, as I say, with a Rundle and Rees-Zammit and see how that went. Potentially in another lifetime. Hogg was a few years younger. That's a Lions back three. So that's your Premiership team. Now, for that Premiership team, I've went for a bit more excitement at the backs, perhaps, and maybe a bit more ball snatchy in the front row with in the forward. Sorry, with your ball playing front three, your back row be made up of Don Brandt, Ben Earls, and Tom Curry, who are all kind of got that fetching ability about them. But obviously Don Brandt's, I just think, is a better all-round rugby player. Moving to URC, this is probably I know more about the URC, but I maybe not get it completely right just because of circumstances. First position for me was kind of nailed on. Stephen Kitsoff, absolutely brilliant, loose head. I think that he's a part of the bomb squad sometimes, and then sometimes he starts. It's really, really bizarre. The next one for me was a little bit more tough, as you guys know. Hooker's possibly more tough, and there's a lot of good hookers in the URC. In the end, I've opted for experience and went Ken Owen. I know he's maybe past his best a little bit, and I know you could just pick any Irish hooker and it'd probably be awesome. But Ken Owen for me just gets the nod. Also, I wanted to try and get one Welsh player in. I'm doing this off the cuff a little bit, so you never know, there might be more. But that's let's go with Ken Owen at the hooker spot, and then it's really a no-brainer for tight head. It's got to be Tag Furlong, right? The guy is unreal. So yeah, Tag Furlong for me in there. In terms of the second row, it's a lot of swithering about for this, but I think ultimately he has to be picked, and that is one of my favourite players, and which is weird for me to say this because I really don't like the Irish rugby team in the sense that I always want them to. I kind of root against them, and I don't know what it is. It's just a thing about them. I guess when you're at the top all the time, people want you to fall down, right? Tagburn, the other Tag, it's got to be in there. Excellent rugby player. And then coming back in and solidifying that second row, and it's a terrifying second row, this guy, Eben Estevez, or Estebet even. Can you leave him out if he's available? No. In the back row, a bit more tricky. There's some soft selections. I would quite like to bring in Jamie Ritchie, I quite like Luke Crosby at the moment, that he's playing for Edinburgh. You've got Jack Dempsey playing well for Glasgow. You could go for all these guys, but I think you've got to be try and be neutral about it, and put who you think is possibly the best slot in. Now, I would have Khaleesi in there, Sia Khaleesi. I think, he just brings that leadership. He'd be the captain of the team. I think he's just, he plays at a high level constantly. So I bring him in. At 7, I think just the way he plays, Joss van der Fleer has to come in and take that 7-0. Now, this will seem like Edinburgh bias, but I'm going to pick Bill Matter for number 8. I think he offers a point of difference that other players that I've named don't, and other back rows don't. I know you've got Doris. Doris is unreal. He can play at 6 as well. You would maybe have him in the team. Peter O'Mahony, he is another player I can't stand, but just an excellent hard rugby player that you could live with having in the team. Justin Tipperick from Wales, plus loads more. I think that's a player. Speaking of Welsh players, we've missed out a very good Welsh back row and Toby Faletau in the Premiership team. But I've done that one now, so I'm gonna go back and change it. So I would go Big Bill Matter, and it's not due to any kind of prejudices, but I just think the guy's brilliant. Scrum half again. I guess I'm not quite as tuned into all who the scrum halves are outside the Scottish teams in the URC, but for me, you've got to look at the Irish provinces, and they've normally got good ones. You've got Doak, who I think is pretty good. You've got Casey, who's pretty good, and then you've got what's his name? Oh, that's bad. Cooney, who might be Scottish anyway, and amongst others. And I do think that looking at it from all angles, I think I would probably opt for Jamieson Gibson Park, just because it gives you a settled 1-2. And as much as I hate to say it, I think Sexton probably is your number 10. There's not a lot of household names in number 10 for me in the URC, but it's still a great league. 12. Now 12's a bit more tricky. I do love McCluskey from Ulster. And I think probably though I would go with Henshaw at 12. Just he offers that point of difference. He's less likely to get red carded than Bundy Aki as well, so I'd probably go for him. 13 is no brainer. It's Am. It has to be Am at 13. He's just too good not to put in there. Now the back row, I saw a lot of people naming the same back row, and I'm going to upset them. And this might be because one of the players injured. The first player before we get into the one that might upset people is Mapimpi. I actually think that he's not underrated, right? Everyone knows he's good, but because Colby does all these fancy things with his feet, everyone thinks that Colby's awesome and is the best player for South Africa. He's really not. Mapimpi's a much better winger, and I would pick Mapimpi ahead of him every day of the week and twice on Sundays, as they say. So Mapimpi comes into the squad for me. I know that Colby's in France, by the way, before anyone mentions that. Into the other wing, and this is where people might think, well, it's Scottish bias, but just on form this year, it's got to be Darcy Graham. And again, I know he's injured, blah blah blah, but Darcy Graham is just phenomenal. And I think the way he's been playing, he would have to come in if he's fully fit. Fullback for me, again, another no-brainer. There's arguments all over the shop, but for me, it has to be Hugo Keenan. And I've said this at the time, and I meant it. Hugo Keenan was overlooked for the British and Irish Lions. He should have been in ahead of Williams or Hogg. And as much as I love Hogg, in terms of form, ability, and all the rest of it, Hugo Keenan should have been in the Lions team before Hogg or Williams. That's just the be all and end at the end of the discussion for me for that. So, who do we think would win? Well, based on the fact that I've picked the teams and I know more about the URC and it's probably slightly more balanced. I think the URC team would win. To be honest with you, I think a Premiership 15 against Leinster would lose. I think a Premiership 15 against the URC team would also get beat quite comfortably. It's nothing to do with the players being just basically England and having a kind of all-star team. I just think that when you're playing that game, if they played it 10 times, 9 times the URC team would win. That's just because I think on balance the URC has a better league than the Premiership in terms of depth and ability. And I think that's because most of the teams are kind of run by their union in some way. So the players are kept a bit fresher and the teams are a bit deeper. So anyway, that was the URC debate. I'm sure that people will shout at me and say I got it wrong or I missed their favourite or something like that. I don't profess to sit here and know every single player in the URC and every single player in the Premiership. This is just based on my sort of knowledge of it. I couldn't sit and tell you who's in form and who's not in form. Anyway, the last thing I want to talk about is it's the last weekend in January, and tomorrow night, Saturday night, brings the Royal Rumble back for WWE. Now, people say it's not a sport, it's scripted. Well, we all know that, but it is a form of athleticism, and it is fun. It's the most fun event in wrestling, I would say, just because it's kind of random and there's always a surprise. Some old guy comes back and gets thrown over the top rope straight away, some celebrity, whatever. So I thought I'd talk some predictions in the Royal Rumble and talk about the Royal Rumble matches rather than talking about the actual card, as it were, because it'd be there for all night, and I quite frankly don't have the energy for it at this time. But I was thinking about this, and I don't know if anyone's been coming up with the wrestling, but what I'd like to see in the men's Royal Rumble is Sami Zayn to be challenged by Roman Reigns to go and win the Rumble, and that's his final test with the Bloodline. For those of you who have not been following, the Bloodline are basically a group of Samoan wrestlers, but this guy Sami Zayn, who's actually a Canadian, has sort of come in as an honorary member of this group, of this family, but now there's questions about his loyalty and stuff like that, and it's all nonsense, but the storyline is actually kind of good, and I think it'd be cool for him to win the Royal Rumble, and the idea being that he wins it and then Roman Reigns can, he's supposed to lay down for Roman Reigns, the guy who's in charge of the whole family business, and then he goes in, says, no, I want my shot at the title, and then wins it at WrestleMania. I think the crowd would absolutely go off on that, and if that's what they've got in store, then I love it. Probably isn't, probably something completely different, but I do love it. So that is the men's Royal Rumble. The women's one's a bit tougher to call because they've got so many really interesting little storylines going on with the women's one, but they don't sell them as much as they probably should. I think for me it's going to be somewhere in the region of the usual suspects for the women's one. Ronda Rousey, that sort of thing, unless they have some kind of surprise signing for someone who wins the Royal Rumble. I do love Alexa Bliss, but she's actually got a title match. She would have been my pick to win it if she wasn't in the title match already. So I think, if she wins it, I think there's a possibility Liv Morgan wins it because they're trying to get her over. But who knows? I'd love for them to sign someone else just random and they turn up and win it. That'd be pretty cool as well. Anyway, enough about Royal Rumble, or the Royal Rumble's coming up. I just thought I'd talk a little bit about my favourite Royal Rumbles, or my favourite moments in Royal Rumble. I remember, one of them was probably my least favourite moment in Royal Rumble, given how frightened I was. I remember watching a Royal Rumble show where The Undertaker, even if you don't know wrestling, you know who The Undertaker is, right? The Undertaker and Yokozuna had a casket match, which is a match where you win by incapacitating your opponent enough that they get put in a casket, which is, suspension of disbelief and all that. Yeah, that match terrified me because The Undertaker supposedly died in it and then rose from the dead at the end of the match on the video screen, and I've never been so frightened in my young life. But it was good entertainment, I guess, looking back on it. It's my favourite Royal Rumble was the 2001, just because it was the first one I'd watched getting into wrestling as an adult again. And The Rock was in it, and it was the first time I'd really got to know him, and he was very charismatic, and and all sorts. So yeah, that was, I guess, the two my two favourite sort of little moments that I remember from Royal Rumbles. Kofi Kingston jumping on barriers and stuff's pretty cool as well. But yeah, anyway, that's enough about Royal Rumble. Finally, just touch on some NFL, and that's obviously going on this weekend as well. It's Championship weekend, and if you're listening to this after Championship weekend, you can laugh if I got this wrong, but I can't see the Bengals losing against the Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes got an ankle injury, rolled his ankle a bit, but the Bengals just look like picture perfect at the moment. Both lines are playing really well. Joe Burrow looks like he is, I think he's possibly the best quarterback in the league, even more so than maybe Mahomes. Like, I think he can do it all. He's a really good pocket passer as well. The NFC game's a little bit harder to call, but I know it's going to upset Berkey, my friend that's from sort of that area and supports the Eagles. But I think San Francisco are going to get into the Super Bowl as well, even with the last overall draft pick. So yeah, it's just they've got an awesome team. And what I quite like about San Francisco, which I shouldn't say as someone who predominantly supports the Rams, is San Francisco are doing all of this with a 7th round, dead last draft pick quarterback who's considered to be Mr. Irrelevant, is what they call the person who gets the last overall draft pick, which just shows that football is actually a team game. Because quite often people think if you've got an awesome quarterback, you're just going to win. The Bills had an awesome quarterback and they looked dire. So it just shows if you're well coached, you've got loads of good players around your quarterback, you can still succeed with someone who's like pretty novice or not considered an elite talent. So I think that I quite like that story, because quite often it's like all about quarterbacks in the NFL. So I like that. Yeah, so apart from that, let's call it a night. We're almost half an hour. Let's not do a big long one like I did last week. When we come back, I've got some interviews lined up with various people that I'm going to do. Come back next week, have a bit of a chat. By then we might know the Scotland team, so I might chat a little bit about that depending on who I've got on. Last thing, and I did want to touch on this just briefly before I went away, because it does mean something to me and to people I know, friends that I have. The Scottish Rugby trans ban has come in, and they've followed suit of the RFU and WRU, and I think the IRFU as well, and completely banned trans people. Now, I think the people who are most qualified to debate this topic are women and trans women, because it's, essentially that's what the rugby is for. I think what gets me about the SRU's decision, and that of those before them, is they've got these things about bone structure, and it gets all technical and it's all biological this, biological that, but there's and that may be so, I don't know, I'm not qualified to talk about those sorts of things, but I think what annoys me about it is that there doesn't seem to have been any collaboration with the people who are actually affected by this, the players in the leagues, and it seems to be that from what I've seen, there's a great deal of the women's rugby community come out speaking against this, including current Scottish internationalists. So I think again, this is the one thing this is definitely an example of, whether you agree with it or disagree with the action SRU. It's another example of the SRU being someone to help them out with their PR. I mean, you've got a situation where you announce this in a week where Liberton Rugby Club have cancelled their women's team due to not being able to support their, quote, additional needs, end quote, and also Rufus McLean getting sacked and obviously still being in the news, albeit I give credit to Glasgow. We're all ready to give credit to them for coming out and saying that they were taking steps to try and educate people and make sure they had good male role models for people. And you're like, oh, good for you. You're trying to be preventative. You're not being reactive. That's excellent. You've realised there's been a snake in your organisation, and you're now trying to make sure that no more get in. Excellent. Oh, wait a minute. We're going to announce this thing that has all the subtlety of a brick through a window and expect everyone just to sort of sweep over it. And then they tried the cheek to put it in a mail dump with about 40 other things. We're talking about Finn Russell articles and this article and all this stuff to try and deflect it. Own the bloody decision, SRU, if you're going to do it. Own it. But for goodness sake, this was something that was going away for you guys. You didn't have to do it. You didn't. And the whole thing, you'd had J.K. Rowling or somebody else tweeting you, maybe it wasn't J.K. Rowling, but there was people tweeting at you to do something, to follow the RFU, and there's been people mentioning it in comments. That had quietened down. It was unnecessary to make this decision. Now, you could have had a proper consult with players about it and then made the decision. And what I take issue with is they're basing it on supposed scientific evidence, and I'm not disputing that males and females are different, okay, at birth, in terms of sex, but was there any evidence that actually there were more injuries because of trans inclusion in women's rugby? I'd like to know that question. I'd like to know what the players thought, or actually thought about this. Obviously we're seeing things, Twitter's an echo chamber, right? So you go on Twitter and you follow the people you kind of agree with. You don't really follow people you don't agree with on Twitter, so you hear people that you agree with. But I think the thing is, and this is something to bear in mind for everyone, right, when you're sitting talking about this thing, not everyone who supports the ban or the rules that the SRU made is a transphobic person, but every transphobic person will support the ban. So when you're thinking about it, really think about why you're supporting the ban. And the last thing I'll say, which will sound kind of preachy, is treat people the way they want to be treated. And if a trans woman is saying as a trans woman, they're a woman, if that's how they want to be addressed. And if a trans man wants to be addressed as a trans man, address them as such. And if someone says they're non-binary and wants to be addressed as they, them, then address them as such. Yeah, you'll make mistakes. I still do it with people I know who are non-binary. But just think that one day that could be your family, and that could be the way your family feels, your family member feels. So, before you be really cruel, just think you're making yourself a hypocrite. Anyway, that's enough serious talk. I hope you enjoyed the pod. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend, week, whenever you listen to this. Cheers.